Welcome to Sourcing Strategy Part 2. In Part 1, in Week 4, we have learned rule of purchasing, procurement, and sourcing in SCM, basic elements of sourcing process, make or buy versus outsourcing, and organizational issue in sourcing. Today we learn different sourcing strategies with regard to the number of supplier, geographical supplier distribution, and sourcing principles, including methods of spend analysis and supply selection, and to know elements of supplier relationship management or SRM. Let's start with single and multiple sourcing. What sourcing strategy should we choose depends on the following. In order to determine the right number of suppliers, larger volumes can be ordered from just one supplier. For instance, using single sourcing strategy, with the objective of generating volume bundling or scale. That effects can reduce order and transportation costs. However, that policy can also increase inventory costs. Thus, there might be a danger that dependence on just one supplier, therefore, is considered as too high risk policy. SCOM, or Supply Chain and Operation Management, needs to take disruption and other risks as factors to make sourcing strategy. For example, due to tsunami and floods in 2011, companies which used single sourcing with suppliers in Japan and Thailand experienced supply disruption that made their production activities has been stopped for several months. Intel claimed to have lost $1 billion in sales during the fourth quarter of 2011. In 2010, eruption of a volcano in Iceland interrupted lots of time-sensitive air shipments in global supply chains. A fire in the Philips semiconductor plant in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2000 has caused its major customer, Ericsson, to lose $200 million in potential revenue. Nokia has also been affected by this disruption, but could find alternative supply source within 3 days. However, it was very costly. Thus, the supply chain managers need to rethink this lean sourcing since the cost savings can be overwhelmed by disruption impacts. A company needs to consider the level of product variety and manufacturing complexity before deciding to adopt single sourcing. If the sole suppliers produces items which are used in many different models of products, the impacts of a disaster items can ripple very fast in the supply chains, like it was the case of Toyota in 2011. That is why many companies like Samsung tend to have at least two suppliers, even if the second one provides only 20% of the volume. Choice between single and multiple sourcing needs to consider the demand uncertainty and lead times important. At some situations, it is better to adopt multi-sourcing, like a case of Zara. Zara produces their trendiest items in Europe close to highly dynamic and changing demand. Slow-moving items are, on the contrary, produced in Turkey and Asia since lead time is not crucial and cost reduction can be achieved in manufacturing. Li and Fung Limited, a contract manufacturing company from Hong Kong, has a variety of supply chain plans that enable to flexibly shift production among the suppliers. In terms of coordination complexity, adapting multi-sourcing raises a coordination problem that is related to managing supply chain operations, such as material requirement planning and master production scheduling. Finally, post-sales issues such as product return, refurbishment, and recycling are more complex for a multi-sourcing strategy. There are some advantages and disadvantages of adopting single sourcing. The plus points are there is an opportunity to make long-term agreement which affects on more stable purchase price. There is an opportunity of strategic sourcing where suppliers can be included in the product development process at a very early stage. Low transactional costs are possible due to larger order scale. However, some disadvantages like inefficient price policy due to the absence of competition in supply, and in case of an unreliable supplier, on-time delivery, reliable product quality and supplier service will be a problem. If that happens, an opportunity to collaborate with any other suppliers is missing. Looking at the location of suppliers is another aspect of a sourcing strategy. This is related to geographical sourcing area strategy. There are two extremes, starting from local sourcing with limited number of suppliers but same norms, language, currency, shortest distance and thus fastest reaction time in case of changes, versus global sourcing, offering the broadest supplier base but suffering from, for instance, long distances, different currencies, norms, standards, and etc. In between, there is also national and continental sourcing, which should be mentioned here, in order to avoid wrong decisions that might be taken based only on the pure purchasing price. Practice shows that a stringent focus on the total cost of ownership or TCO approach is highly recommended. Due to shrinking time to market and the need for agile management of the supply chain, the pure advantage of a low purchasing price can easily be eliminated by the need to order large lot sizes. These may be traveling around the globe for weeks, resulting in higher safety buffers, high inventory, and high transportation cost. That means that total cost of ownership focus for a sourcing strategy also has to be considered. For global sourcing, items of high volume, steady demand, and low transportation costs are most preferable. However, different challenges and risks in regard to cost, service, quality, and sustainability issues should be involved in the analysis. In addition to supply reliability, global sourcing have to minimize costs of labor, taxes, transportation, insurance, transshipment, duties, and transactions. All of those are elements of total cost of ownership or TCO. Considering the long distance supply, quality, bill of material, quality control, after sales service, certifications are important mostly for perishable and natural products. By considering lead times are long due to high volume of orders, it is important to maintain on-time delivery, demand responsiveness, and order flexibility in order to avoid stock out or overstock at buyer side. In addition, technical equipment, company image, service reliability are also need to be taken into account when choosing a global supplier in order to set up long-term agreements. Finally, sustainability issues such as politics, economics, social cannot be ignored by considering that suppliers need to be always available to deliver in a more stable business and political environment. Issues regarding global sourcing decision analysis are presented in table in the slide. Global sourcing offers access to the broadest available range of suppliers, in contrast to local or national sourcing, and it provides many advantages. But at the same time, efforts to establish a relationship with the global vendors or partners will increase, as they require certain language skills. Global sourcing also requires longer time for traveling to suppliers and for the later transportations of goods. Also, aspects such as currency risk or political stability gain very high importance, as do different cultures, norms, or standards. The table indicates some advantages and disadvantages of the two extreme geographical sourcing strategies, local versus global sourcing. In between these two extremes, there are also opportunities to follow a national sourcing strategy. This would be related to an expansion of the sourcing radius, for instance, increasing the number of potential vendors but continuing to keep risks at a low level. The continental sourcing strategy would further enhance the accessibility of supply base, but would still limit the risk of very long transportation times and related large volumes. In conclusion, there are three categories of decision variables when deciding on global sourcings: cost, quality, and service. For cost, for instance, can be divided into labor cost, taxes, transport and logistics, transshipment, warehousing and packaging cost, insurance cost, custom duties, transaction and communication cost. For quality, it includes bill of material, total quality control, after-sales service, and correction of fault. For service, the analysis includes flexibility and responsiveness, technology, machines, information communication, company reputation, image, financial stability, and delivery reliability. Let's back to our case study of Volkswagen or VPS. VPS is Volkswagen Production System. Employ GIT or just-in-time technology to operate both lean and agile. GIT is a philosophy of manufacturing based on plant elimination of all waste and continuous improvement of productivity. It encompasses the successful execution of all manufacturing activities required to produce a final product from design engineering to delivery and including all stages of conversion from raw material onward. The primary elements including having only the required inventory when needed, to improve quality to zero defects, to reduce lead times by reducing setup times, queue length and lot sizes, to incrementally revise the operations themselves, and finally to accomplish these things at minimum cost. Using GIT, a company will at the same time reduces inventory at the production site without adding more lead times and thus increase productivity and responsiveness. In Volkswagen case, there is a significant improvement in production and logistic operation as follows. The new Volkswagen plant in China can produce two different Golf models as well as two different Audi models on the same assembly line. Standardization of production processes cut down the number of painting procedures from 90 different ones to a single procedure for all 90 plants. Reduction in the number of variations, for instance, only 28 variations of air conditioning instead of 102. Additional benefit is GIT can better predict the demand of high-value materials through standardizations, which makes the demand pattern is more steady. Let's take a look at GIT technology at Volkswagen Saxony. The Volkswagen Saxony production plant is located in Mosel. The new plant was built as a greenfield concept in the early 1990s, looking back at a long car manufacturing tradition in Saxony. It was one of the largest construction sites in Europe. in the body plant, processes are highly automated with the help of robots. There are two parallel assembly lines for both Volkswagen Passat and Golf. The painting is also automated and designed with environment considerations. The plant produces Volkswagen Golf and Passat as well as car bodies for Bentley. The painted bodies receive a barcode for final vehicle assembly depending on the specification orders by the customer. Assembly takes place on the assembly line. Readers scan the barcodes on the bodies with R symbol and the left side. The material requirements are automatically generated and sent to the supplier, and order retrieval takes 10 minutes to complete. They deliver the required modules of GIT and GIS, or just in sequence, for each individual vehicle. Consider an example of GIT, collaboration of the cockpit manufacturer between SAS and Volkswagen. The SAS is a supplier of cockpits for Volkswagen. SAS itself manufactures the cockpit 3 kilometers away from Mosel. Perfect timing is crucial for success. While ACS assembles the cockpits for 95 minutes, production at Volkswagen continues in a parallel operations. This saves time and money. Delivery batch size from SAS to Mosel is at 24 cockpits per truck. That takes 40 minutes to arrive at Mosel factory. From the entrance gate of Mosel factory to assembly lines takes additional 35 minutes of transportation time. Finally, the retrieval module needs additional 10 minutes to process the preview received for production planning and to mount cockpits on the car body. For this concept, synchronized production in partnership, Volkswagen Saxony received the German Logistics Prize. The completed modules arrived GIT at the assembly line. In our case study, the lead times of 200 minutes include the time when order is placed by Volkswagen to its supplier, that is SAS, until the order are ready to be dispatched to customers. Supplier Relationship Management, or SRM, is the systematic approach of assessing suppliers' contributions and influence on success, determining tactics to maximize suppliers' performance, and developing the strategic approach for executing on these determinations. SRM helps to create positive buyer-supplier relationships and determines which activities to engage in with each supplier. Supplier relationship management is used by supply chain professionals involved in areas such as procurement, project management, and operations, where these professionals regularly deal with suppliers. Supplier relationship management includes both business practices and software and can be divided into four areas: supplier analysis, supplier selection, supplier integration, and supplier development. Let us consider these areas in detail. In our slide, there are four sections in a pie chart of SRM. Assess section performs the following task. Spend analysis. Spend analysis is used to analyze which supplier for which sales volume is covered for what type of part or commodity. That means the number of purchased items require careful analysis in order to generate the basis for developing improvement scenarios. Such scenarios could be related to adjusting, can be increasing or reducing the number of suppliers, or transferring additional responsibility to the supplier. In general, the opportunities are assessed in the first step of the strategic analysis phase. Spend analysis can be used to answer the following questions. What categories of products or services significantly influence the company's spending? How much are we spending with various suppliers? What are our spending patterns at different locations? The second strategic step is focusing on creating profiles for category. For instance, in paper industry, paper order from a single or multi suppliers. And the question is that should we use single or multi suppliers? If we use single supplier, then we do not need to cluster those materials or services in order to identify repetitive sourcing patterns. Third, the total cost of ownership has to be identified in this stage. This is important for developing comparable decision papers that will be used to support make or buy decisions. The result is a condensed overview that points out which items will be externally sourced compared to the parts or components that will be produced internally. And finally, we have the last task of assessation. In strategic step 4, the potential suppliers need to be identified and screened. It might well be that new suppliers will be added after they have submitted a promising offer. Based upon defined supplier selection criteria, the supplier base will need to be critically evaluated. A set of predefined selection criteria captures and clarifies distinct attributes. This helps to facilitate and speed up the assessment process. Spend analysis is not the only tool of supplier assessment. Other tools such as supplier industry analysis, cost and performance analysis, supplier role analysis, business process analysis, business benefit analysis, commodity plan implementation and execution are also commonly used in practice. The second section of the pie chart is select. In this section, the sourcing team will create a supplier shortlist based upon the identified supplier selection criteria. There are different approaches possible, but in principle, the task is to assess to which degree the capabilities of the supplier meet the customer selection criteria. Either they are completely fulfilled, or to a certain degree fulfilled, or they will not be fulfilled by the supplier. That means in order to identify the most appropriate vendor, commonly developed and accepted vendor selection attributes and processes will need to be defined and applied inside the organization. We have an example, supply selection in the next slide. The selection of vendor is a multi-criteria problem, which will include qualitative and quantitative measures. The relative importance of the criteria, sub-criteria, and in a lot of cases also the weighting factors are determined by top management and purchasing managers. It is important to emphasize that careful and proper selection of suppliers is a very crucial and thus important element in sourcing activities because the performance of the overall supply chain significantly depends on every single party involved. Once the short list created, the detailed contractual discussion and negotiations will be initiated. Then in this step, commercial conditions spatially are on the agenda, but logistical requirements, for instance, packaging instruction, lot sizes, transportation devices, items identification tags, or delivery notes are also part of the agreement. When the contractual negotiations are finalized and the contracts are signed, this specified agreement will become part of the daily operations processes. In practice, weighted models are frequently used in order to respect priorities or to focus on more important criteria. This might be quality, cost, or sustainability related criteria, for instance. The factors of cost, quality and delivery performance, as well as capacity, experience, service, technical capability, and financial status are used in practice. The consideration of these factors facilitates the long-term relationship with possible vendors or partners. The next two sections are develop and integrate. In principle, the repetitive process of sourcing execution and supply chain collaboration now starts. Practice has shown that traditional purchase orders tend to be considered inflexible because quantities and delivery dates are fixed. In contrast to purchase orders, settling agreements are preferred in business practice because the exact demand date and quantity will be communicated from the ordering party to the supplier at a later stage. In this context of how to conduct sourcing execution and supply chain collaboration more practically, usage of IT should also be mentioned. Supplier collaboration portals, for instance in the case of Supply Own in Chapter 3, enable communication between partnering companies and thus represent an intelligent platform in which to exchange necessary information to initiate the corresponding material flows. Supplier development is focused on the one hand the improvement of the supplier ability to implement production improvements, for instance, by practical problem solving or by establishing continuous improvement processes. The second issue is striving to improve suppliers' cost, quality, and delivery by having supplier development teams at the vendor facility. As the details indicate, process and results-oriented approaches are complementary. Supply development is related to active consulting support and to providing the necessary guidance in order to identify problems, to analyze them, and to solve them practically. This might include the temporary provision of specialists, or it might even be linked to financial support. Overall, the purpose is to secure, develop, and maintain a solid and reliable supply base. Leesons and Farrington in 2012 suggested a typical nine-step approach to systematically organizing structure and follow the supplier development process. These steps can be represented as follows. First, identify the critical products. A tool like ABC analysis in inventory management can be used. Second, identify the critical suppliers. A tool like multi-criteria decision-making or MCDM can be used. Appraise the performance of the suppliers by using, for instance, supplier audit tool to measure the achievement of suppliers' KPI or key performance indicators. Fourth, determine the gap between current and desired supplier performance in order to make future improvement. Fifth, form a cross-functional supplier development team. A supplier has a connection with purchasing department, production planning and inventory control or PPIC, and product and development of a company. And therefore, all of them have to sit together to develop a solution for better supply. Sixth, meet with suppliers' top management team to synchronize supply quality objectives and KPIs. Seventh, agree how the identified gaps can be bridged. Since minimizing the gaps need responsibility of both supplier and buyer, both parties need common agreement on how to deal with the supply performance gap. Eighth, set deadlines for the achievement of the improvements. This is needed to measure and evaluate performance improvement programs set by both parties. Ninth, monitor improvements, which close the loop of supplier development and integration. Now let's look at one method to select a supplier, namely factor ranking method. The method is popular because its simplicity, but covers a wide range of factors needed by the analysis. There are 6 steps in the method as follows. First, develop a list of relevant factors called key success factor. Second, assign a weight to each factor. Third, develop a scale for each factor. Score each location for each factor. Fifth, multiply score by weights for each factor for each location. And sixth, recommend the location with the highest point score. Now let's practice with the following example. There are 6 success factors of supplier selection. Each of those factors has a specific weight of importance to both supplier and buyer. For instance, cost of purchase items give 20% contribution to the success of supply process, and so on. The scoring involves two suppliers A and B and contains numerical number from 0 to 10 in Likert scale. The higher the score, the better such a particular supplier A or B performs. Supplier rating column is a multiplication of weight column and score column. Total represents the summation of all supplier rating from 6 criteria. We can see from the example that supplier B performed slightly better than A. The method is, however, need to be further tested using sensitivity analysis at several scenarios of performance. For instance, what happens if supplier B cost factor declines from 7 to 4 because the supplier has to increase its product selling price to the buyer? Is there any change about the performance figure between A and B? So, this is the simplest way of selecting suppliers or evaluating suppliers. In sourcing strategy, the following questions need to be assessed and answers have to be developed in principle for the articles of the commodity categories. First, what to source? These are the questions regarding the sourcing objects that need to be answered. For instance, single-use parts, modules, systems, services, or non-product related objects. It also refers to the questions around make or buy, which respectively will consider outsourcing decision. Second, how to source. What is sourcing tool or process that needs to be applied? For instance, do we consider manual sourcing or do we use IT tools such as portals, EDI, and so on? How well are business processes aligned between the supplying and the buying parties? What is the appropriate sourcing organizations, for instance, whether to run the purchasing individually or to establish an alliance and thus follow the idea of collaborative sourcings? From whom to source? With how many suppliers or partners do we cooperate? Do we focus on a sole supplier? Do we prefer double sourcing, or is our strategy to purchase the goods or services from multiple vendors? Which suppliers demonstrates good performance or has further potential? Who should be developed or who should be substituted? Next, from where to source? Do we focus on the cooperations with local suppliers? Is our scope connected to national or continental vendors, or is the strategy to aim for global sourcings? Finally, when to source. How to settle the sourcing from a time perspective regarding the early supplier involvement already at a stage of product development in order to jointly develop the part or module and to agree on the most suitable delivery strategy, including the corresponding containers or stock keeping unit or SKU. Alternatively, the strategies of stock sourcing or demand tailored sourcing might be applied. Okay, that's conclude our sourcing strategy chapter for this course, supply chain design. See you on the next topic of supply chain design.